We're first going to go to Dr. Dower to talk about the exclusion of specific genres of music in academia, as well as the exclusion of directors of specific ensembles in academia. So Dr. Dower, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you. And thanks again for having this panel. It's really refreshing to see a national organization take on such topics at a time such as this. I was a gospel choir director at a college before, and I remember thinking while I was doing so that I felt kind of on the outskirts. Despite my academic background, I wasn't invited to department meetings or anything of that sort. And it kind of troubled me because I wondered what they were saying in the room where it happened. So it caused me to kind of wonder, well, if they're saying one thing over there, how does it impact my students? Because they're all of our students and those kids were music majors, whatever. Now, while I will appreciate the fact that we were indeed a part of the curriculum, which is not always the case. Oftentimes other ensembles are relegated to the VSU or the on-campus organizations there. It wasn't lost on me that we weren't equalized in the way that we were treated, just in any way. We were only brought to sing at, special events that were about like Black History Month or Asian American History Month or those kinds of things, special, and then put us away and showcase the other good choir while everybody else is celebrating the truth of whatever moment we're celebrating. So I thought that was an interesting way to approach choral music, which gospel is choral music, because our country has never quite reckoned with the fact that music, that gospel music and other forms of music, but particularly gospel, was born right here in the good old US of A. We did that. And it hasn't really been given the credit that it should have been. To be honest, if I don't really hear gospel music the way I hear it at my church at any festival. I don't know that every choir could do it. It would be akin to having them learn a Whitaker piece if we got them to that point, to singing it like it's supposed to be done. And so we have to kind of think about how we are bringing in ensembles of different kinds into our university so that when a conductor makes a choice about which pieces to do, that they're not doing it based on their fear of doing it themselves or who's in the room. If you have a fully white choir or Caucasian or European or whatever, any full choir of one thing or one race of people, don't be afraid to stretch yourself out a little bit and bring somebody else in that knows if you don't. And then if you can't bring them in, go where they are. Ask if you could come in to listen to their rehearsals and try to find a way to do it authentically when you do it, so that we can have more ensembles on campus that represent who the whole tapestry of America is, and not just sort of the one place. And then once we bring them onto the campus, make them a part of the faculty and the conversation so that they're not relegated to the other side of the room. And I went to an HBCU, and the gospel choir on my campus was not a part of the music department. It was, BSU over there, them, and they were good. Everybody wanted to hear them. Nobody was coming to hear us, by the way, at the time, because they wanted to hear, some music that was, to colloquialize this, on and popping. So that's what they wanted to hear. And I think it's high time that we take a look at and evaluate what we consider someone that's worthy of being a professor. If somebody doesn't know something that if you don't know something that somebody else knows, then they become essentially a professor. And we often qualify people that teach music of mariachi even based on, oh, well, they're good enough. But the truth is they're experts, and we need to respect that and maybe reevaluate how we bring people into into the academy, and make the academy a whole lot more open, not only to different ensembles, but to different conductors and voices.
Absolutely. And these are just some blind spots that seem to be part of it, part of the tradition, certainly part of my education, being a Eurocentric education. I've made these observations that you're talking about, Dr. Dower, and there are other blind spots and roadblocks, ways in which I have been complicit to racism. And I'd like to turn to Dr. Guice to talk some more about other blind spots.
Okay, so kind of to piggyback off of Dr. Dower, the first thing that is I think the main blind spot for us is that we have to question the internal hierarchy of the ideal. If as educators, as musicians, we have on these programs placed specifically the music of white men as the ideal. And this music is wonderful, it is beautiful, however, it is not the only wonderful beautiful music that exists. And it's the framework of our thinking. If it's just the same thing we do with people. If we look at a person and we relegate them to the other, we do the same thing with the music. The music of people of color, and in some cases women in general, all across the board, is relegated to the special, to the other. And the first thing that has to happen is that as musicians, we have to recognize that that is faulty thinking on its own. We do not, when we listen to the music of a group of people, that is an experience. They are expressing a story in the human fabric, or the story of humanity, and it is beautiful and it's purposeful. We have to judge it on its merits, not on whether or not it comes from what is mentioned in the Grout and Paliska. And that's the first thing. If the only people of color you can name are the ones mentioned, the 5 in the Grout and Paliska, then that means that you have to broaden your education as an educator, which is pretty much the first roadblock, which is, what is it that you were taught? It's okay to look at and say, regardless of where you were trained, you probably were trained with the ideal being Palestrina, Bach, Mozart, and not looking at people like Margaret Bonds, not examining William Grant Still Beyond one piece, not examining Ulysses K, not examining people who have been important composers to the American story outside of their ethnicity. And so then we have to look at recognizing that whole exists. One moment in my own narrative was when I was in graduate school, an expert of choral music was speaking to me and made the comment, and he handed a list out to the graduate students in the room and said, these are great, these are some great pieces. There was not one woman and not one person of color on the page. And I raised that point, and his comment to me was, well, I'm not just going to put somebody on there because they're of color, because they're woman. So that's the whole we have. We often pick music because I think that in academia, I need a piece by a Black composer, I need a spiritual, and we're not actually even examining it on its merit or its worth. We don't actually see it as worthy. Using the broad we, obviously. We have to recognize that it is not enough to just say, this is a piece that represents a people. You have to be able to broaden your understanding that this is just as worthy, and even look at it and understand why it's just as worthy. Which comes into the complicit element of our participation in the racism, which is that we do not understand the performance practice of the music of different ethnic groups within our own nation, let alone people outside of, if we're bringing in a more worldview to choral music. For a while, this was seen very dramatically in how people would perform spirituals. There would be a performance practice style that did not adhere to necessarily the idiomatic rules of that music. And Dr. Kellori Dower was just mentioning in gospel music, I have had set that through an adjudicated listening to Robert Ray's He Never Failed Me Yet, which hardly ever gets performed the way it is supposed to be performed. And we have to look at this, and that right there, you will make sure Bach and Palestrina are performed with the proper performance practice. But when it comes to gospel music, spirituals, even pieces, if you're doing a piece where the composer is Latinx, looking at how you can perform this authentically, which means you may have to bring in an expert. You may have to recognize that it is equally as important, and that your programming has to give everything its equal weight. And then that gives us to the main roadblock. I think the main roadblock for us as educators, which is, why are we doing the diverse programming? If in your mind, the reason to do it is to appease, the reason to do it is to just show something at the end because it's fun. If the reason to do it is you're just to have it on there rather than really looking at the music as valuable, looking at the people who compose this music and recognize this is an important story, regardless of the ethnic makeup of the ensemble you're teaching. If it's a classroom of all majority individuals, majority culture individuals, okay, great. They need to know the history of this country and beyond that as well. Because if we're doing that, then we are teaching anti-racism. And if we're doing that, then we are going beyond and we're moving past the roadblocks. But the first one is within our own thinking. How do you equalize this music? Where do you see it? Is it just the extra? Is it the other? Or is it an important factor in presenting a program that is holistic in its approach to the human condition and the human story?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is systemic, and you're making it very clear as to how this has evolved back with Dr. Dilworth's beginning of providing the context. And I'd like to go to Dr. Saplan next to talk more about some blind spots.